Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. As I said, I know you do understand a little bit of French, so I don't know where you catch that in the presentation. But as I said, we've worked a lot with Omnirobotic between 2018 and 2020. I think, when were you hired at Omni?
2 months before COVID hit, essentially.
Oh, great timing.
Yeah.
And what's your role exactly at Omnirobotic?
So as the marketing director, basically, I'm responsible for road mapping our lead generation, road mapping our content, and then coordinating with contractors or executing, those two kind of pillars on my own where contractors don't apply.
Great, perfect, thanks. So I had a couple of questions as we discussed before the presentation. Let's start with strategy. So please tell me, how important is it for a company and for you as an employee to have clear objectives on what needs to be done in the company?
So when you're talking about the content, and désolé que je vais pas parler en français par cause que ça va pas être assez enrichissant, peut-être.
It's all right. No worries.
But I just wanted to give that disclaimer, but just easier to get the point across. But having clear goals is really critical, especially the smaller you are and the fewer resources you have, right? You can't set broad-based goals and expect those, firstly, to be rapidly achievable. And then secondly, from a scientific perspective, if you want to have a rationalized marketing approach, you sort of have to have falsifiability, right? So you have to be able to say whether something is working, but also whether it's not working, and move on. And that's where you set clear goals, you identify who you really want your customer to be, whether they're actually responding or whether they're really not interested, and you iterate from there. So the goals can change, but clarity is the best way to make sure they change in the right direction.
And as you guys are working, because I know you're working with Sam in the pipeline also, and we are still working with you. How important is it to align the work between team members and consultant and company outside of it, and to make sure that this strategy and those objectives are clear to all of them?
So again, in the context of small companies, you have to have probably, you'll have generalists, but you'll have on certain processes potentially a higher degree of specialization than you would have in a large company. And that's because, again, you don't have the resources, you don't have the scale to be everything to all people. So in that context, being clear about whose role comes in where, who's responsible for setting the expectations for the customer and then actually delivering to the customer what they're expecting. Those are critical steps. Great.
And could you please tell me, let's jump into the structure from your point of view, from a robotic point of view, how complex or what's the reality of selling to B2B businesses, beside like selling to Mr. Everyone like me in the B2C businesses? So how complex is it, or what can you tell us about it?
So I think probably a good example is just understanding the market that we were selling into. So probably, I joined the company in 2020, but the company was founded in 2016. And obviously, JP, you were guiding a lot of the development during, in those intermittent years. And really, there was no market for autonomous robots at that time. Now it's 2022 and people are realizing we can't afford to program robots. We can't afford jigging. We can't afford all those costs. So it's become more of a pull market than a push market. But then when you talk about B2B, if you're pushing a product on people, you have to give them superb kind of rationale for why to buy it. If I go buy a car, we'd like to think it's a rational decision. Very often it's not. Very often it's, oh, I like how this one looked, and that one, the other one I didn't like so much. They all look the same. They change every 10 years and they look the same still. The B2B buyer needs to be able to justify almost every aspect of their purchase. There's very little room for judgment calls. So you have to provide that reason for them. Otherwise, if you're just getting them to do your job for you, you're less likely to make a sale.
Great, thanks. And I know what's your value proposition, guys, but could you tell for the benefit of the audience, what are the key points of your value proposition, and how does those translate into your marketing tools, into your website, into trade shows that you do in inbound marketing?
So the strongest points of the value prop are really that there's no programming and no jigging required, right? This is a big step for robots because obviously it's been a limitation. And in the early years of the company, one of the most frequent kind of prospects or customers that would come to the company were saying, you know, we bought robots expecting that we could make it work for our type of production. And it ended up not to be the case. And they're just sitting in a back room somewhere in a warehouse gathering dust. That type of production is generally referred to as a high mix production or a highly varied production. So getting that across is really about evangelizing that message or what it's like for those people. As it happens in North America, most manufacturers are high mix. You know, when you have basically the history of outsourcing and everything, a lot of concentrated labor supply, you can concentrate a supply chain overseas for mass manufacturing. But when you have high mix, heavy equipment, a lot of variation, it sort of has to stay local. And in that environment, it's become tougher and tougher to find skilled labor. So to boil all of that down, you know, it's autonomous robots. They work in a high mix environment. They address the skilled labor shortage, but they also improve quality, reduce waste, reduce rework, all those things that are typically headaches kind of can go away, and the company can feel empowered and enabled by the technology they have on hand.
Great. And how did you manage to mix traditional approach with more digital marketing now, or with more content marketing over the time?
So the best, you know, the industrial space is still fairly traditional. Most people prefer face-to-face conversation, meeting in person. Even though COVID has limited that, you know, you can sense that there's still a default to seeing solutions in real life, right? So the role of content in that environment is really sort of like air cover, right? You have, you know, military metaphors can be overused in marketing, but it really is that you kind of have to soften the playing field a bit. And if you have the opportunity, not necessarily to sell, but to educate, to influence the way people are thinking, to pull them, you know, along a bit of a story or along a bit of a track, so that by the time you get to a trade show, or you get to sending them a video, or you get to a one-to-one meeting, you've already influenced some of their thought process. That makes it a lot easier to continue moving them along and build a relationship and have strong client relationships, and not just, you know, something that feels maybe more transactional.
And how long could it take for a customer that doesn't know Omnirobotic until they became actual customers? So in terms of months, let's say.
Well, there's some people who we've talked to recently that first knew about the company in 2017, 18. So it can be a long time before they're confident in deploying the solution. There's other people who find out about it and they have an innovation mindset. That's typically in larger organizations, right? Organizations where there's teams with a mandate to innovate and find every new solution in the market and try it out. And those people will sign up, you know, in a short time to a service or to a product if they're confident that it's worth experimenting with, not even that it can work. In terms of getting, you know, if you would think of a repeatable sale, it can be up to 12 to 18 months. I mean, we're making effort to kind of shorten that process, but it's about product market fit at that level and making things a little more efficient and understandable. So in the industrial space, you know, don't be impatient is what I would say, I guess.
Yeah, great. And talking about the pipeline, could you, without disclosing anything, but could you tell us a couple of KPIs that you guys were tracking? Let's say you were tracking at first, and did those evolve over time? And what are you tracking right now?
So broadly, you always want to look at the lifetime value of your customer over your acquisition cost. So that's pretty common in a SaaS or in a startup model. You know, and that's why people invest large sums of money in these businesses, because you might not make back all the money it takes to acquire a customer in the first year. But if you can make a significant amount of money over 10 years with each customer, then that's a great, that's a great business that's worth investing in. So at the top level, you really have to look at those sort of metrics. As you go down into different parts of the pipeline, you really want to think about things like sales efficiency, pipeline dollars, and then influence metrics. If you can improve, if you have different stages in your pipeline, so you might have marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, and then a way to qualify from sales to negotiation or a final deal. You have to look at each of those stages, figure out what your conversion rates are, and figure out how you can incrementally improve that. And sometimes it can be as simple as content influencing the customer. Other times it's more complex. You have to rethink your value prop, rethink the payback, that your customers are going to get. Maybe it's your pricing. But, as time goes on, it really becomes more about the incremental steps than the bigger picture.
Thanks. And one last question. I know it's a team. I know everyone's involved in going for the objective, but in your company, you do more the marketing part, Sam do more the sales part. I know there are engineers involved in there at some point. So how do you manage to make sure that the customer doesn't feel like he's being thrown from one or the other team member? And what are those zones that there's kind of a switch in between maybe your role and Sam's role? So
the marketing role and the teams and the contractors we work with, including, of course, JP's team, is really to inform the customer, to get them ready for a sales conversation. So at that level, we have information sessions. We share a lot of content. We do email, we do social, we do, there's all kinds of ways to sort of start the conversation with a lead or to get prospects in the door. At the sales level, we give them the expectation that they're getting expertise. That's part of what they're getting from Sam and also from the engineering team, is that there's a lot more experience there in terms of actually installing solutions. And that kind of gray hair, trusted advisor approach really does create a little more credibility through the process, right? Which is what you need as you go towards the final sale. And then on the engineering level, there can be handoffs. There can be not, I don't think there's confusion. One of the benefits of having more people around the table, let's say, and this is, if time permits, is that you give people the feeling that the resources are in place, that they're going to get the insight they need to have a great project or have a great installation. They get the impression that you actually do care. And if you actually do care, you want to get people involved. And, not everybody is always sure of everything they're going to say, right, in those kinds of conversations. So having more people involved so that there's sounding boards, so that you can have different perspectives. So if there's an argument, well, there's somebody else there to diffuse it. If there's too much agreement, there's somebody else to point the flaws in that agreement. Those are all actually useful to a sales process. It's not just about, having a script and following through it. You really have to engage as you go forward on an individual level with the customer.
Great, thanks a lot. And I said it was the last question, but I do have another one. So
go ahead.
I know Francois was a lot involved, the founder, Francois was a lot involved at first stage selling. So how is he involved now, 4 years later?
Primarily, I don't know everybody in the audience, so I'll be careful with my words, but Francois is like a dynamo. He's like a human energizer bunny. So he will push beyond his limits in terms of stuff to do and not notice once he's past them until it's maybe a little too late. But really what he's best suited for at this stage of the company is to sell to people who are doing the most interesting projects. So that's new applications, that's new fields, new processes, new workflows, or different robot brands. We have a lot of different factors in each sale. So there's a sort of novelty gradient, I guess. And really his, I could say the same on the technical side of the company, right? Our CTO 6-8 months ago was doing a lot of management. He's not a manager. That's not what he was born to do. He was born to code and develop and do architecture. And so, we brought in the resources where he's not doing that day-to-day stuff as much, and he's able to add value in the best possible way. That's the same thing with Francois or with any founder. In the long run, you want the team to be around them, to support them, to put them in the right direction. And then everybody's, adding the most value that's suited to their real skill set.
So could I say that having this strategy, this structure, and those people like you that are executing the process have given François and Laurier the benefits of maybe working more on the business than working inside the process of the business?
Yeah, in the long run, you have to add expertise and you have to standardize a little bit, especially to support, the kind of financial model you might be working with. But, I think that's what, as a founder, you would want to in the long run, is you want to focus on the things you like doing and really feeling like you're accomplishing your goals, you're realizing your vision, you're adding value. And, that's the purpose of the company around you, is to help you do that. And, if you're getting caught up in politics or if you're doing other stuff, you're going in the wrong direction.
Great. Thanks a lot, Robert, for your time. I really appreciate it.